The noise inside the arena was constant, a living thing made of voices, footsteps, and expectation. Thousands of people pressed together under hot lights, waiting for the music to begin. It was the late 1970s, a time when Bob Marley's presence alone could turn a concert into something larger than entertainment. This night was supposed to be another celebration of rhythm and unity, another moment where music lifted people above the weight of their daily lives. No one in that crowd arrived expecting fear. No one imagined silence. Bob Marley stepped onto the stage with his usual calm, the kind that never demanded attention yet somehow commanded it. He carried himself not like a star, but like a man with a purpose. His guitar rested against his body as if it belonged there, as if it had always been part of him. The crowd roared when they saw him, a wave of sound that rolled forward and crashed against the stage. Bob acknowledged it with a slight nod, his face serious but gentle, eyes scanning the sea of faces in front of him. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The band was ready. The lights were set. The air vibrated with anticipation. But beneath that surface, something else was brewing, something small and almost invisible at first. Somewhere near the front rows, a man stood out of rhythm with everyone else. His movements were unsteady, his energy sharp and restless. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. He was watching Bob Marley with a look that didn't belong in a place built on music and joy. As the first notes rang out, Bob closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the sound settle. The band followed him naturally, each beat falling into place. The crowd swayed as one body, thousands of people breathing together, moving together. It was the kind of unity Bob Marley lived for. But then, cutting through the music like a blade, came a voice that didn't belong. It started as a shout. Loud, slurred, angry. At first, many thought it was just excitement, another fan overwhelmed by the moment. But the words kept coming, harsher each time, spilling out without rhythm or respect. Heads began to turn. The band faltered for just a fraction of a second. The music didn't stop, but something had shifted. Bob opened his eyes. He didn't look toward the band. He didn't look at security. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward the source of the noise. The heckler was closer than most people realized, close enough for his words to land clearly, close enough for his anger to feel personal. His face was flushed, his stance aggressive, his voice fueled by alcohol and something deeper than drunkenness. Crowd sensed it instantly. A ripple of unease spread from the front rows to the back of the arena. People stopped dancing. Some stopped singing. The music softened, not because Bob commanded it, but because the band could feel the tension moving through the space. All eyes followed Bob as he stared into the darkness where the voice came from, and then it happened. Bob Marley locked eyes with the heckler. There was no anger in his face. No challenge. No fear, just stillness. A deep, unsettling stillness that felt heavier than shouting ever could. The heckler's voice trailed off mid-sentence, as if the words had nowhere left to go. Around them, the crowd began to realize they were witnessing something fragile and dangerous, a moment that could break in any direction. Security shifted at the edges of the stage, ready to move. The band waited, hands hovering over instruments. Thousands of people held their breath without realizing it. In that suspended moment, with the music hanging unfinished in the air, Bob Marley stood completely silent, eyes fixed on a man who had come to disrupt, to provoke, to tear something. A part that no one knew what Bob would do next. No one could predict whether this would end in chaos or violence or something far worse. All they knew was that time itself seemed to slow as Bob Marley and the heckler faced each other, separated by only a few feet and a lifetime of difference. Crowd had never been this quiet. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. It wasn't the polite quiet of a theater or the respectful hush of a church. It was heavy, uncertain, charged with fear and possibility. Thousands of people stood frozen, watching a single connection between two men pull the entire night off its course. The heckler shifted his weight. Without the cover of noise, he suddenly looked smaller, more exposed. His confidence had been fueled by chaos, by anonymity, by the belief that he could shout and disappear into the crowd. But now there was nowhere to hide. Bob Marley's gaze held him there, steady and unblinking, not accusing, not threatening, just present. Fully present. Bob did not speak. He did not gesture. His hands rested calmly on his guitar, fingers relaxed, as if the music itself was waiting for permission to return. The band watched him closely. They had played through riots, power outages, political tension, and open threats before. But this was different. This was not noise against noise. This was silence against anger. In the front rows, people began to feel uncomfortable. Some turned their heads away. Others leaned forward, unable to look anywhere else. A few shouted at the heckler to be quiet, to leave, to stop ruining the moment. But Bob did not encourage them. He did not acknowledge them at all. His attention remained fixed on the man who had tried to break the night. Security moved closer now, stepping into clearer view. Their posture was alert, tense, hands ready. They were trained for force, for removal, for ending disruption quickly. All they needed was a signal. One nod from Bob and the heckler would be gone in seconds. Everyone knew that. The heckler knew it too. Bob Marley knew it most of all. Still, he said nothing. The heckler tried to laugh it off, muttering something under his breath, but the sound died almost immediately. His voice no longer carried power. The crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. They were listening to the space between breaths, to the unspoken weight of the moment. Some people later said it felt like time folded in on itself, like the entire arena was being asked to choose what kind of night this would become. Bob finally shifted his stance, just slightly. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, not toward security, not away from the crowd, but directly toward the man. The movement sent a wave of whispers through the audience. This was no longer just about music. It was about control, about dignity, about whether force or restraint would win. Up close, Bob could see the details others couldn't. The unfocused eyes, the clenched jaw, the hurt beneath the hostility. This wasn't just a drunk man shouting nonsense. This was someone carrying something heavy, something unresolved, something looking for a place to explode. Bob's expression did not change. He lowered his chin slightly, maintaining eye contact, not dominance, not submission, recognition. The band waited for a cue that never came. The lights burned hot against the stage. Sweat trickled down Bob's face, but he didn't wipe it away. He stood there, breathing slowly, grounding himself in the moment. To many in the crowd, it felt unbearable. Why wasn't he doing anything? Why wasn't he stopping this? Why wasn't he protecting the show? But Bob Marley was protecting something else. The heckler's shoulders sagged a little. The anger that had once spilled outward now seemed trapped inside him. He opened his mouth as if to shout again, then closed it. Whatever he had come to prove was slipping away, dissolving under the weight of being truly seen. Still, Bob remained silent. No one knew what that silence meant yet. No one understood what Bob was choosing, or what it was costing him to stand there and absorb that hostility without returning it. All they knew was that the moment was stretching towards something irreversible, and whatever happened next would define the night forever. The crowd was no longer breathing as one. They were holding their breath, waiting for Bob Marley to decide whether this confrontation would end in removal, escalation, or something no one had ever seen before. The arena felt smaller now, as if the walls had quietly moved inward. Every sound seemed amplified by the absence of music. The scrape of a shoe against concrete, the low murmur of someone whispering a prayer, the distant hum of electricity in the lights above the stage. All of it pressed in on the moment Bob Marley was holding together through sheer presence. The heckler finally looked away. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it changed everything. His eyes dropped to the floor for a brief second, then lifted again, searching the faces around him. What he saw there was not support, not laughter, not agreement. He saw confusion, discomfort, and something closer to disappointment. The crowd, that had once been invisible to him, had become very real. Bob noticed it. He relaxed his shoulders, just a fraction, as if acknowledging that something inside the man had shifted. Still, he did not speak. He did not rush to fill the silence. He allowed it to exist, to do its work. Bob had learned long ago that silence could be louder than argument, that stillness could disarm where force would only harden resistance. Security was now fully alert. One of them glanced toward Bob, silently asking permission. Another moved closer to the edge of the stage, positioning himself between the heckler and the musicians. The plan was clear. Remove the man, restore order, resume the show. That was how these moments usually ended. But Bob Marley did not give the signal. Instead, he did something unexpected. He slowly sat down on a stool at the front of the stage. The movement was calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The crowd reacted with a soft gasp, a collective intake of breath. Sitting brought him closer to eye level, with the front rows closer. To the heckler, closer to everyone. It was not a gesture of weakness. It was an invitation. Bob rested the guitar across his lap, but did not play. His fingers touched the strings lightly, not to make sound, but to feel their tension. He looked back at the heckler, not with challenge, but with patience, as if he was willing to wait as long as it took. The heckler shifted again, visibly uncomfortable now. The alcohol that had fueled his bravado offered no guidance in this silence. There was no music to drown him out, no crowd noise to hide behind, no anger coming back at him to justify his own. He was standing alone inside his own actions. People in the audience began to feel something strange. What had started as fear was turning into reflection. This was not the confrontation they expected. There was no shouting match, no dramatic removal, no victory for either side. There was only a man on stage choosing restraint and another man forced to confront himself. Bob's face remained calm. But inside, memories stirred. Years of being misunderstood. Years of being mocked, dismissed, labeled. He remembered being told his music was noise, that his message was dangerous, that his appearance was threatening. He had faced authority with guns and crowds with stones. Compared to that, this moment was quiet. But it was no less important. The heckler finally spoke again, but this time his voice was different, quieter, unsteady. The words were unclear, swallowed by nerves and embarrassment. Whatever he said did not matter as much as how he said it. The anger had drained away, leaving confusion behind. Bob listened. He leaned forward slightly, not to hear better, but to show that he was listening at all. That simple act landed harder than any reply could have. The crowd noticed. Some felt their throats tighten. Others felt an unexpected sting behind their eyes. They were watching not just a performer, but a man choosing empathy in a moment where dominance would have been easier. The band members exchanged glances. They had never seen Bob do this before, not like this. They trusted him completely, but even they didn't know where this was going. The music was still suspended, waiting for a resolution that had not yet arrived. Time passed in strange ways. It felt like minutes and seconds at the same time. The arena remained quiet, not out of command, but out of respect. Everyone sensed that this moment mattered, even if they couldn't yet explain why. Bob straightened his back slowly. He took a breath, deep and measured. His eyes closed for a brief instant, as if he was centering himself, choosing his next step. With care. When he opened them again, they were soft, but resolute. Whatever Bob Marley was about to do, it would not be impulsive. It would not be loud. And it would not be forgotten. The crowd leaned forward, hearts pounding, knowing they were standing on the edge of something that could still break either way. Bob Marley stood up slowly. The movement was unhurried, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that settled over the entire arena. When he rose from the stool, the crowd instinctively straightened with him, as if pulled upward by the same invisible thread. This was no longer a standoff. It was a decision. Bob did not look at security. He did not look at the band. He looked only at the man in front of him. Then, finally, he spoke. His voice was not raised. It did not carry anger or authority. It carried something far more disarming, calm, steady, human. He said only a few words. Words so simple that many people later struggled to remember them exactly. But everyone remembered how they felt. Bob told the man that this space was not built for hate, that the stage was not a place to throw pain at strangers. That music was not a weapon, but a bridge. He did not shame him. He did not lecture him. He spoke as if he were talking to someone he understood, someone who was hurting, someone who had lost his way for a moment. The heckler froze. Something in Bob's tone broke through whatever armor the man had been wearing. His posture collapsed inward. His shoulders dropped. His head bowed. In front of thousands of people, the fight drained out of him completely. He looked less like a disruptor now and more like a man who suddenly realized where he was and what he had done. No one laughed. No one booed. The crowd was silent in a way that felt reverent. Bob took a step closer to the edge of the stage and extended his hand, palm open. It was not dramatic. It was not symbolic in an obvious way. It was simply there, an offer without conditions. For a long second, the heckler did not move. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out. Their hands met. It was brief, barely a moment, but it sent a visible wave through the audience. Some people gasped. Others covered their mouths. A few felt tears they hadn't expected rising without warning. In that simple contact, something shifted, not just for the man, but for everyone watching. Bob nodded once, gently, and released his hand. Security stepped back. The band waited. Bob turned toward his microphone, adjusted it slightly, and picked up his guitar. His fingers found the strings with ease, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment to return to life. He did not explain what had just happened. He did not frame it or name it. He simply began to play. The first notes floated into the arena, soft at first, then fuller, warmer. The crowd responded instinctively. People began to sway again. Breaths were released. The tension dissolved into something almost sacred. The song felt different now, deeper, heavier, like it had been earned. The man who had interrupted the concert stepped back into the crowd quietly. He did not shout again. He did not raise his voice. He stood still, head lowered, listening. Later, people near him would say he cried through the entire song. By the end of the night, the story had already begun to spread, not because of outrage, not because of chaos, but because of restraint, because of a moment when a performer chose dignity over dominance, humanity over humiliation. Years later, people would argue about what Bob Marley said in that moment. They would debate the details, replay recordings, search for exact quotes. But those who were there always agreed on one thing. The most powerful thing Bob Marley did that night was not something he sang. It was something he refused to return. Hatred. And in that refusal, in that quiet strength, the crowd learned something. They would carry long after the music faded. That sometimes the bravest response is not to overpower anger, but to stand still in front of it until it loses its voice.